Numerous monarchs are interred within St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. One of the most infamous kings to reign over England is interred in the castle. Henry VIII is interred alongside the despotic King Charles I, who was executed after the English Civil War, while St. George's Chapel recently served as the burial location for Queen Elizabeth II, a figure cherished in memory. The recollections of the majority of the globe pertain solely to the Queen. Elizabeth II was the longest reigning monarch in British history, and she devised specific plans for her burial, including the site of her interment, which she personally oversaw. Contrary to popular belief, Elizabeth II is not interred in the royal vault. Instead, she was laid to rest in a small memorial chapel constructed at her behest during her reign. What is the story behind this? The King George VI Memorial Chapel, located within St. George's Chapel in Windsor, was commissioned by Elizabeth II in 1962 as the burial site for her father, George VI, and her mother. The chapel's construction was substantial, and the architects aimed to design the modest church to house the remains of 3 monarchs and their consorts. In December 1962, Elizabeth II's private secretary communicated 2 requests to the Dean of Windsor: first, to prepare her eldest son, Prince Charles, for confirmation, and second, to identify a designated resting place for her father, George VI. Following George's funeral, his remains were interred in the vault, as his unexpected death left no pre-existing tomb or designated space for his burial. Queen Elizabeth II desired a designated area within St. George's Chapel for her family, resulting in the design of a little chapel extending from the side of the main structure. The chapel's request was not executed for 5 years, since the Queen wished to save her mother from the grief of interring her husband a second time. The Queen also disliked life-size representations. Effigies on tombs were discovered across locations such as Westminster Abbey and St. George's Chapel, where space was already constrained due to their presence. A chantry was determined to be constructed, with its facade adjacent to St. George's Chapel and the entrance located off the nave. This was the inaugural addition to the chapel since the early 16th century. Multiple designs for the burial chapel were conceived, with several being dismissed. Nevertheless, the second proposal, put forth by architect George Pace, received approval. This entailed the establishment of the chant chapel situated between the Rutland Chapel and the northern choir of St. George's Chapel. This design measures 18 feet in height, 10 feet in width, and 14 feet in depth. The work was completed in 1969 and is located between 2 external buttresses of the north wall of the choir, constructed from stone mined in CPUM, Rutland. Stained glass comprised of red and blue was present for the small chapel. Features a roof adorned with embedded gold leaves and contains an altar displaying a portrait of King George VI. Upon completion, the chapel was said to incorporate elements of St. George's Chapel. Beneath its floor lies an interment chamber with the capability to lift the floor for the burial of monarchs in various graves. However, despite its contemporary design, the chapel is currently experiencing overcrowding. I personally observed this a few weeks after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, which highlights the surprising dimensions of the space. Although the measures I provided may seem minimal, it is exceedingly diminutive. The remains of King George VI were relocated to the freshly finished chapel on March 24, 1969, at a cost exceeding £500,000 in today's currency, totally financed by the royal family. The chapel was inaugurated in a ceremony attended by a significant portion of the royal family, including the Queen Mother, the wife of George, and other members of the Order of the Garter. The chapel houses gates. The words I spoke to the guy at the gate of the year were, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown," and these words were uttered in 1939 when the Second World War engulfed Europe. Included in King George V's Christmas greeting to the nation, which provided many individuals with hope and security, also entered within the chapel are the ashes of George's younger daughter, Princess Margaret, the Countess of Snowdon, who was the sister of Elizabeth II and has since passed away. After a struggle with a smoking-related disease, Margaret, unlike other members of the royal family, was cremated. Following a private service at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, her remains were transported to a crematorium, where she was burned. Margaret described the royal burial place at Frogmore as exceedingly sombre. She desired to be interred beside her father, and her ashes were initially housed in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel until being transferred to King George VI Memorial Chapel after her mother's funeral, which occurred 7 weeks later. The intention was to inter the Queen Mother within the new chapel, as there was sufficient space for her to be laid to rest in the same grave. She, of course, died. Decades later, the remains of Margaret were interred simultaneously. As her mother's coffin was interred in the little burial chamber beneath the chapel's floor. Margaret's ashes were retrieved from the royal vault and interred in her parents' tomb simultaneously, indicating that beneath George VI's ledger stone lie not just him and his wife, but also their daughter Princess Margaret. There exists a gravestone for her, situated on the right-hand corner of the church, which reads, "In thankful remembrance of Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, born August 21, 1930, has passed away on February 9, 2002. An inscription composed by Margaret is inscribed on the edge of her tombstone. "We express our gratitude, Lord, who through your Spirit restores our trust. When we engage with worldly matters without prayer and shut our doors, we forfeit our invaluable divine gift to worship and adore. Therefore, O Saviour, fill our hearts to love you evermore." The subsequent royal family member interred in this chapel was Prince Philip, the spouse of Elizabeth II, who passed away in 2021. He was an exceedingly elderly man, even by contemporary British standards. Furthermore, it is less widely known that after Philip's death and subsequent funeral, his body was interred in the royal vault, where his coffin remained for a period, possibly due to insider knowledge regarding Elizabeth II's ill health or her limited life expectancy. Elizabeth II and her husband Philip died around 1 year apart. Philip's remains was placed in the royal vault, awaiting interment at the time of Elizabeth II's death. Following her passing, her body was transported to St. George's Chapel for the service, after which it was then lowered into the royal vault. This was the committal, and her body was ceremonially interred in the royal vault. Following the funeral at a private service on September 19, 2022, at approximately 7:30 p.m., Elizabeth II was interred within the memorial chapel that she had commissioned. Interestingly, the bones of Prince Philip were also relocated to the chapel following the Queen's funeral. Her casket was constructed approximately 30 years prior. Her funeral involved a coffin constructed from English oak, which was lead-lined to mitigate decay. 9 pallbearers were required to drop her remains into the vault due to the weight of the wooden coffin. The death of Elizabeth I shocked the world, particularly as many had only known one monarch on the British throne. However, it is less commonly known that she is not technically interred in a royal vault, but rather in a small memorial chapel that she commissioned for construction herself. Thank you for viewing and supporting our channel. Please ensure to subscribe, and once again, thank you.